water drop first hits the water, the first thing that happens is a crater is formed. Milliseconds after that, a water jet comes up. This is called a Worthington jet. It's named after Professor A.M. Worthington. In his lab, he was the first person to take pictures of water splashes in 1895. I'll talk more about that at the end of the video and give you more details and links to his research papers. If the Worthington jet gets hit by a second water drop, then this is what the splash looks like, this little sort of crown that forms at the top and splatters out, making interesting and various patterns. In this case, the second water drop is hitting the Worthington column at the very beginning, and that's the little fuzzy part. If you stare at these bubble drops long enough, you'll start to see shapes in them. In this case, I see a princess standing in the middle of the crater. Is that an eagle, or are those Indian feathers on the right-hand side? This one looks like a face looking to the left. Here I tried to get a little too artsy with Photoshop, but I think this one turned out pretty cool. I'll show the setup and how I took those shots at the end of the video. It's harder than you'd think. Here's some cool pictures I took of bubbles. I'll show how I took these shots at the end also. I tried taking pictures of flat bubbles, hoping I could get complete circles, but it was fraught with errors. I was having a heck of a time trying to get decent pictures out of these flat images. Now these beautiful patterns are across the entire bubble, but there's no getting around the laws of physics. In this case, light bouncing off these bubbles, you can only see what's reflected. The angle of incidence equals the angle of reflection. So you can't get an image of the entire half dome of the bubble. You have to settle for a piece of it. I had a purpose in mind. I thought they looked like planets, but more importantly, I made this one so that I could use it for the cover of my next fiction book. It's not just for looks. There's a murder mystery involved in this book, and the contents of these poisonous bubbles plays a part. Here's the setup for taking pictures of the bubbles. I used the softbox suspended on these 2x4s in my garage. I eventually lowered the softbox even closer to the bubbles, and I replaced the white with a black background, but the idea is basically the same. You could fire the softbox with the remote trigger from the camera, and it took pretty decent pictures. I went online, looked at a lot of YouTube videos of people taking pictures of bubbles. I tried all kinds of different setups, but finally ended up with something like this. Here's the setup for taking pictures of water drops. Again, I'm in my garage. I got this bowl and this pan from Goodwill. The idea is the bowl is filled with water, and as water drops hit it and it overflows into the pan, you don't make a mess. To the left, I have a Godox MS300. It's a 300 watt second flash that's AC powered, and of course it's hooked to the remote trigger on my Fuji XH2. And hovering above this bowl, where it's kind of hard to see, I used an old enlarger that I bought at an antique store and stripped down just to use it for positioning things vertically and shooting pictures straight down. Connected to the enlarger, I had a 4-way XYZ rail, and hooked to that I have a clamp holding the water valve. Here's a picture of the water valve, and here's a picture of my enlarger stand sitting on the garage floor, and my 4-way focusing rail with the clamp on the end that holds the water valve. This is the base of the water valve. The cable on the left goes to the Pluto Trigger, and then another cable from the Pluto Trigger goes to the camera. A little button on the bottom of the valve you push, and it lets 1 drop of water out for as long as you hold the button down. The green light will flash when you do that, and up at the top there's a little switch to turn it off and on. On the back side of the water valve is where you put a battery, and on the right side you'll notice this nut, and I had a problem with the nut being too tight, and at one point when I tripped the valve it opened up and dumped all the water and didn't stop, and I couldn't make it stop no matter what I did. I finally had to read the directions on their support website and loosen that nut a little bit, and then everything worked like a charm. I also had to have a brand new fresh battery for this to work at all. The front of the Pluto Trigger, and here you see the cable that plugs into the Pluto Trigger that goes to your camera trigger. This Pluto Trigger is very clever. It not only can time the release of water through the water valve, but it can be triggered by sound or light or breaking a laser beam that's aimed at the Pluto Trigger. It has a built-in infrared sensor, and it can detect animal bodies and heat and take photos. Because it can be triggered by sound, it can detect lightning, and it can also hook through an app detect when you're smiling to take a photo, and it can be triggered by motion or vibration. It's really a jack of all trades. Currently the Pluto Trigger retails for $119. The water dropper valve is $40. You can bundle the two of them, the trigger and the valve, for $159. A bundle with the trigger, valve, and the clamp that's shown in those pictures totals up to $179. After all of this, no matter which set you order, you also have to order the specific cable for your camera, which is another $5. And there's a warning, be sure you order the cable because it doesn't come with it and you'll have to have it. The black button on the bottom is the shutter release and Bluetooth button. The light on the left is the program status light, which I pretty much ignored. The light on the right is the battery charging LED, which you can see when you plug it into a USB charging cable. And between the two is a little microphone so that it can synchronize things or fire your camera with different sounds. The side view shows the 3 plugs. The center is for charging with the old-fashioned USB, not a USB-C. On the right side is the line that goes to the camera, which has a little camera icon. And on the left side, that's the trigger that goes to the water dropper. On the top is the on-off switch, which unfortunately is not labeled, but you get used to it because when you turn it from the off position, which is showing it now to the right, and flip it to the left, it flashes the lights, so you know you just turned it on. On the bottom of the Pluto Trigger, the window on the left is the laser light sensor, so you shine the laser into that receiver. In the middle is an infrared sensor, and on the right is an infrared emitter. This is the laser pointer that comes standard with every Pluto Trigger. This is the on-off switch, which again isn't labeled, but there's a light on the other side that flashes when you turn it on. And the laser is on the right, and the knurled knob you can turn to focus the laser. Here's the flip side showing the LED that would light when you turn the laser on. On the back side of the laser, in addition to the warning label, there's a charge port, the old-fashioned small USB connector, and then a 2.5mm jack, which can be connected to the aux port of the Pluto Trigger and this allows the Pluto Trigger to turn the laser beam off when it's triggered just before it fires the shutter so that your picture doesn't show a picture of the laser beam. Here's what the Pluto Trigger app looks like on my iPhone when I was taking pictures of one water drop colliding with the other water drop. You set the delay from the time the trigger is fired until the drop fires the flash, which is 322 milliseconds. The drop size was set to 12 milliseconds. That is, the solenoid that opens the valve for the water stays open for 12 milliseconds. Then after a delay of 120 milliseconds, the second water drop is dropped, which was of size 4 milliseconds. Here's a drawing from the paper produced by Professor Worthington in 1895. Quite the work of art. Here's what I believe is the first picture in the world ever taken of a water drop crater, and the next picture is the world's first picture of the Worthington jet, named after the professor. I'll leave a link below to these articles. They're fascinating reading. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video.